im se svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima, dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati.
I had the honor to participate in conference called On Guard for Liberty of Mankind, which took place from September 29 until October 1st, 2023 in Stockholm. I had the opportunity to talk with exceptional people about topics important to all of us around the world. So let's listen. At the mention of global organizations such as WHO or UN, your first thought is a positive one. Organizations founded with noble goals to take care of global public health problems or to prevent global wars and disaster from even happen again. Maybe that was the intention when they were founded, but today we are witnessing that they are not exactly that. Dr. David Bell is former WHO employee, scientist and public health expert. Let's hear what he thinks about these global organizations. David Bell, welcome to our show in Croatia.
Thank you, Andrew.
You had a huge presentation here, and one very interesting thing is about how global organizations are functioning. Can you explain us?
Yes, it was particularly about the World Health Organization and the pandemic agenda as we see it now, but it's more than that. But the World Health Organization is a good example. So people think it's a very benign organization. It was set up originally to essentially to assist countries that needed technical help to address the bigger burdens of disease in the world. So very good intentions. It's actually done a lot of good things in the past over the years. It's changed very much over the last 20 years. It's a very different organization now. People are not catching up yet with that. So particularly the funding change. It used to be, it would receive core funding on a technical basis and according to disease burden and the wishes of countries. It would address, the health problems of the world and particularly emphasize community, the importance of communities, of individual choice in healthcare, etc. Over the last 20 years, the funding has changed in two big ways. Firstly, it's become much more, about 80% of the funding now, rather than being core funding where the WHO decides what to do, it is funding called specified funding or thematic funding, where the funder gives money to the organization to do a certain task. So most of what it does now is determined by the funder, not by the World Health Organization. So it's according to what the funder considers is most important for them. The second big change is, rather than just country-based funding, which it nearly all was originally, it is now quite heavily privately funded as well, by private investors, and the second largest funder of the whole organization is the Gates Foundation, so it's a private individual. But also by pharma corporations. So these private entities, corporations, people, they give funding for a reason, and all of this funding is specified. So they are giving the private sector is giving money to the World Health Organization to do things that will benefit or are seen as important by this private sector. And that is why public health has moved to, from community-based health, the importance of nutrition, etc., very heavily to things that you can make money out of in the private sector, like vaccines, other commodities. So when the WHO now is prioritizing a certain area, it is because certain countries, and they're particularly the two biggest countries funding it are the US and Germany, that are the biggest investors in vaccines. So there's no coincidence there, but also private investors. So the WHO now does what these public and these countries, particular countries and these private entities want it to do, not what the rest of the world wants it to do. So and alongside the World Health Organization, we have other international organizations that have grown in the last 20 years. Gavi for vaccines, CEPI for vaccines in pandemics, UNITAID. So these are all very heavily privately influenced as well. There are private people on the board, but they're seen as international organizations. In the private sector, you only fund things, as I said, to get return on investment. So we now have these major organizations internationally in public health that are primarily for the interests of private sector and certain countries, rather than the interests of the world as a whole and the people of the world. So, at the moment we have the World Health Organization working to take control over pandemics and all health emergencies across all countries. And this
changing international health regulations.
Yes, health regulations and the treaty. And this will be voted on next year. So what we're seeing is an organization that's heavily influenced by the private sector and by certain countries with big vaccine investments, and half the countries are completely non-democratic states anyway, taking control over the health of people who supposedly live in democratic states, in democracy. So, it's insane to do that. It makes no sense in a democracy to hand something so important completely to private sector and to countries that have very different interests.
It looks to me like a business model.
It is a business model, and there's a lot of money in this. So now most of the money in the international health sphere is not going to the things that kill most people, like tuberculosis, malaria, diabetes, etc. It's going to, well, we've just seen it go to the COVID vaccine, where the average age of death is about 80 years of age. And we've seen talked about yesterday, the largest program the World Health Organization has ever run, which is COVAX, to vaccinate the world against COVID.
Whole world.
70% of the whole world was their aim. And they've had $10.8 billion into that program. That's almost 3 times the entire annual budget of the World Health Organization for everything else. And they know that most of the people they were going to vaccinate, so in low-income countries, are too young to be affected badly by COVID. They also know that they already had COVID because they tested that on a large African study. They know that almost everyone in 2021 already had natural immunity. So there's no possible public health benefit, but they're diverting $10 billion from these things that actually kill people to something which is providing very large profit for the sponsors of the World Health Organization who are sponsoring this agenda. So it's become a big business where these organizations have been taken over by the private sector. It initially appeared benign public-private partnerships. We get more money from the private sector to help public good. But people forgot that the private sector only puts money in to get it back, and they have a responsibility for their investors. So a pharmaceutical company, they put money into the WHO on behalf of their investors who want money back multiplied. So they will push for the programs where their investors will benefit, which is not what the rest of the world needs for their health. It's purely to get, to sell vaccines, to sell commodities.
And if this new international health regulation pass, and it seems it will, because there is no big resistance from it.
It seems, yeah.
And what we can expect in the future? Are we going to expect more pandemics?
It will. So
maybe every day, every year pandemic.
Yeah, possibly. So it does a few things. The amendments, they change the definition of a health emergency that can be declared from something that's really killing people on a large scale to a threat. So, and one person, a director general, decides if it's a threat or not. Not even the committee, just one person. And remember, he's sponsored by the private sector. So the other thing it does is set up a very large surveillance mechanism in every country, and every country will have to invest in this. They're talking about in total $31.5 billion, so that's almost 10 times the WHO budget just on this. So they'll have very heavy surveillance, so they will find viral variants, because this is nature. There's viruses all through nature. You look, you find them. They can say,
you look, you find them. That's important to say.
It is very important, and they can then just say this is a threat. It doesn't have to be even hurting anyone, and it's crossing some borders. Therefore, you have an international health emergency. So the other thing that the amendments do at the moment, the current amendments are recommendations. The current international health regulations are recommendations mostly, and these include recommendations for border closures, for
lockdowns,
essentially for lockdowns, for mandated vaccination, mandated medical examinations, etc., and incarceration of people, quarantine. So it will change these to be obligatory. Countries will undertake to follow all the recommendations. So they will find these variants, and then they can declare an emergency. They can close borders, order border closures, lock people down, prevent them from going to work, order medical examinations, quarantine, and then they can bring in a 100-day vaccine. And the CEPI, which is one of these public-private partnerships, using taxpayers' money, is developing this 100-day vaccine program, which means an mRNA vaccine with very little regulatory oversight, push out very quickly without much testing. And they can use this vaccine as a way of giving people their freedom back that they have just locked down. So people will take it because children want to go to school, people want to work, and then the money will go to the pharmaceutical companies. So this is predominantly funded by the taxpayer, but all the profits will go to the pharmaceutical companies, and there's no clear health benefit. I mean, you're talking about threats. In the last 100 years, and people need to understand, since the Spanish flu, this is WHO figures, there's only been 2 significant, or they would say significant, pandemics, one in 1957-58, one in 68-69, which influenza. They killed about 1 million people. That's less than die of tuberculosis every year. And then we had COVID that kills people at an average age of 80. So we haven't had severe pandemics since we had antibiotics at the time of after the Spanish flu. And there's no reason, apart from manufactured viruses or modified viruses in a lab, there's no reason to expect this in nature. So this is also, the whole emergency agenda is built on this fallacy that there's an increasing risk. The only real reason the risk could increase is if we keep seeing more lab leaks from poor or misguided research. So, but this is being, there's a huge profit drive to this. They made hundreds of billions of dollars during COVID, the vaccine companies. So they have a war chest now where they can buy politicians, they can buy regulatory agencies, etc., and they can fund these international agencies. So international public health has got to a point where it's very heavily captured. It's very hard to see a way out of it apart from countries just saying they're not going to accept these organisations anymore. We need completely different organisations with no private sector involvement, no conflicts of interest, and sort of almost start all over again.
They made agreement with the European Union and they take over this system of Green Pass.
Yes.
Is this the way how they implement this force in the future?
It's the way they are implementing it, yes. So this will make it very hard to resist the vaccine when they bring it in.
That means in case we have, for example, digital ID and Green Pass and all together, and when they implement central bank digital currency, what we'll have in digital wallet, that means in the future, if they decide it's pandemic and they offer us vaccine, if we don't take it, then we cannot use it other means.
If you don't take it, you can't buy your groceries because it's a programmable currency. And the international health regulations and the treaty both include a requirement for the countries to work with the WHO to stop all dissent. So not only will the WHO say this is a threat, but they can make it illegal to say, no, it's not a threat. And to give evidence for that, as we saw during COVID, where people lost their licenses, etc., for pointing out the truth.
And we are facing now also that whatever WHO says about health is the only truth. If you do this differently, yes, you will be censored.
Yes, and I mean, obviously this is incompatible with democracy. So we're not looking at something to improve our democracies. We're looking at something to take away democracies, essentially to bring in a sort of international fascist state where you have very close cooperation between very large multinational corporations and certain areas of government to control people and to control the narrative, and out of that to extract wealth, which we saw during COVID. Most people have become poorer. A very small number of people who are the people who've been pushing this lockdown narrative and are pushing the pandemic agenda have become much, much wealthier.
And some people asked me, we don't have laws that allow that, but answer came, as I understand, well, corporation will enforce this. That means it's not necessary to have a commitment from the side of the government. Corporations who are all around the world can implement, for example, Green Pass, and then you cannot use it without anything.
Airlines can implement it for travel. Venues, shops can implement it to buy groceries, and we've seen that in many countries, even Australia, where I originated. You needed a QR code in much of Australia to buy groceries. So this could absolutely happen. We thought they couldn't mandate masks. We thought they couldn't mandate vaccines, and they did over much of the Western world. And there are many ways of enforcing this, and we've seen that many politicians are obviously corrupted by the amounts of money that are being accumulated through this. So I think it's naive to think that our laws will stop this from happening. We've seen it happen during COVID with, as you said, central bank digital currencies and so on. It's going to be extremely hard to resist this. So the only way really is to stop complying now. And I think firstly we need to stop complying with obvious stupidity, which is very much the basis of this constant health emergency. I mean, we're sitting here fine, it's the sun shining outside, we're not in a health emergency. We have to see life as it was before 2019, where other things were more important, and just not go along with this narrative. The other thing, I think there are certain politicians who are standing up against this, and it's really vital that the populace get behind them, because not everyone is can be bought, I think. And it's a time when we really need to value the truth and integrity above the other aspects of politics that we used to think about. I think in the Western world particularly now, it's not about left or right. We're talking about, do we want individual sovereignty and a truthful society, or do we want to live in this sort of fallacy of constant emergencies and a few people and corporations at the top essentially deciding how much freedom we have and what we can do each day?
I had an interview with your countryman, Malcolm Roberts, senator, and he said it's a fight between control and freedom.
It is, yes. So it's not a left and right thing. Personally, I was on the left side of politics. I think I still am. But I feel like there's not many people left there. Most of the people that I thought really valued human rights and so on, they thought people should be thrown out of work if they didn't have an injection. Yeah. So I think we need to move away from this old sort of style of politics, left and right, and we need to think, what we're working for is the freedom to have those differences, and the freedom for you to say one thing and me to say another, and to have a good argument, and then to go and have a drink over it and do something else. And so as soon as we see censorship built into these, as soon as we see initiatives to supposedly stop misinformation, stop people from having contrary opinions, we know that there's something wrong, that this is built on fallacies, and this is more important to fight for than the sort of left-right values that we used to think divided us.
David, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you. Witnessing new crises such as war, potential new pandemic, climate emergency, and financial insecurity accompanied by high inflation and disrupted supply chains. Many already know this is a part of global mosaic that constantly revolves around the two opposition keywords, which are control versus freedom. I would like to paraphrase a statement that has followed us for decades. Who controls money controls everything. Catherine Austin Fitts, a financial expert with global experience, among others as a federal housing commissioner at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, give us her vision of the development of the financial sector in the near future. Well, Catherine Austin Fitts, welcome to our show in Croatia.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
Well, after a few years of pandemic, we are now facing huge financial problems, inflation, and we are expecting also a decline of some economies. What you can see now is what is happening in the economy.
Okay, so what is happening in the economy is there is an effort within the Bank of International Settlements and its 63 central banking members, which is most of the GDP in the world, to institute total central control of all financial transactions by first making them all digital and then controlling the payment systems, including doing things like CBDCs. But I assure you, it's the digital transaction control, and they can do much control without CBDCs. So what we want to do is make sure that can happen, because what that is a financial coup d'etat, which will change the fundamental political and governance system. It'll change finance, it'll change economy, but we go from a world where there's currency, where we can transact freely, to a world where, because CBDC is not a currency, it's the end of currencies, it's a financial transaction control grid, and your money can be programmed and it can be turned off. So let's say we decide we want to double your taxes. We just take it from your account and there's nothing you can do. Let's say we don't want you traveling more than 5 kilometers from your home. Your money won't work more than 5 kilometers, and there will be no cash. We want it all digital. This is why we promote cash. If we don't think you should be able to eat pizza, your money won't buy pizza. It will only buy what we script. So the rules, and this is what the head of the Bank of International Settlements has said, the rules can be made centrally and enforced centrally. And of course, what that's talking about is it's the end of national sovereignty, because banks will be able to control you at a central global level, and so there's no national sovereignty and no individual sovereignty. We're literally talking about a slavery system.
And how they're planning to implement this?
Well, they've been implementing it for decades. So we've seen steady centralization and consolidation of the healthcare system. But if you look at the conference where you and I are seated right now, we have 4 themes. And one of the themes is media, because part of the way you control is by giving people fake maps. You know, maps of reality that are false, but help you herd them into the slaughterhouse. Okay, so one is fake maps, so we talk about media. Another is healthcare. So healthcare rules and regulations are being used to manipulate the economy and build control centrally of all the assets. So if during the pandemic I inject trillions of dollars into my friends' wallets and I shut your business down and shut off your income, suddenly you have to sell your land and real estate cheap. You have to sell your business cheap, right?
That's right.
So my pals with free money can come in and buy you off and buy you up and get you to work for them, right? So healthcare is being used for tremendous amounts of engineering and manipulation with the economy. And then we have a section on law and governance, because politicians and the courts are being blackmailed, they're being bribed, they're being manipulated, they're being controlled. So we see terrible corruption entering into the judicial sphere. And then our 4th track is money, And we're talking about the title of that track is Financial Transaction Freedom. What is it? What threatens it? And how do we act to secure it? Because what we need in every family, every community, every region, every country is to go to work to build financial transaction freedom without the central system, so we don't need them to transact or trade with each other.
That means solution is to decentralize as much as possible.
To decentralize, but for decentralized nodes taking back power to be able to collectively work with each other, literally globally, because this is the freedom fighters everywhere versus a relatively small group of people who want total central control. And so, they're both global and local. We need to be local and global. So, I'm laughing because you're from Croatia, and Croatia has the best delegation of freedom fighters in the European Parliament. I want to compliment you on your EU representation. I don't want to move forward in this world without them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I want to be connected to the best freedom fighters everywhere, whether they're in, so I'm based in Tennessee and then the Netherlands. But if the best freedom fighters in the world are some of the most powerful freedom fighters in Croatia, I want to be connected.
Mislav Kolakušić and Ivan Vilibor Sinčić.
Fabulous.
Catherine, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Politicians are elected by the people to serve their interest. We are witnessing that this is a rare phenomenon in today's democratic states. That is why it's a special pleasure to talk to somebody to whom people's interest is more important than his own political career. Andrew Bridgen is a member of UK Parliament who even earned his expulsion from the Conservative Party for seeking the truth about unpleasant topics. This did not show him, and we witnessed the success of his public appearance. Let's hear what he has to say. Hello, Andrew Bridgen. Welcome to our show. Well, you were on the guard for freedom for mankind already for a long time, but it seems to by yourself. But you have success. Can you tell us what is happening in UK Parliament?
Yes, I'm probably the only parliamentarian that speaks out, but what I can tell you is that although there's 650 MPs and 850 members of the upper chamber of the House of Lords, there's about 4,000 real people who work in Parliament, and they're the cooks and the cleaners, the security guards, the clerks, the researchers, and even the cleaners in our Parliament are politically aware because of the building. And every week I've got the cleaners will come up to me and whisper in my ear, "We're praying for you, your protection, you're the only one who's speaking out." The people know in my Parliament, 80% of the people who work there know. Even the staff members of MPs who would stand in that chamber today and say the vaccines are safe and effective, the lockdowns were essential. Their own staff come to me and say, when is this cover-up going to end? We can't take any more of this.
Really?
Yes. They know. And I will also say that despite the media blackout in the UK, 75-80% of the public, they know there's something seriously wrong with these vaccines. They're not having any more of this.
And very soon you will have some discussion about this.
Yes, I've been resistance. The easiest way to get a debate in my Parliament is to get MPs from across different parties to sign, and then you go to the Speaker and you say, we all want to talk about this issue. Obviously that's not the case with excess deaths. They don't want to talk about excess deaths. I can understand the government don't want to talk about excess deaths because they're in charge. But we're in a position where the opposition parties don't want to talk about excess deaths in my Parliament. It's something that's been affecting every community, every constituency. We're running about 8.5–9% above the 5-year average.
Yeah.
And our 5-year average is inflated because for 2.5 years now, we've had excess deaths, so the average is rising. And everybody knows in my country, everybody knows someone who's gone before their time, someone who's died suddenly, mostly of heart problems. I've been asking every week since January for a debate in Parliament on this without support, and eventually last week the Speaker was forced to write to me, and he's given me Friday the 20th of October. We're off for 3 weeks now with conference recess, so when we come back on the 16th that week, I've got a debate on the Friday afternoon. It's the worst speaking slot. He's given me Friday afternoon, the last words that will be said before the Parliament shuts for the weekend. But what we're doing is I've done a little video of it, which has gone out. It's being promoted. And then people all around my country are doing their own videos saying, my name is this, I live here, this person is my member of Parliament, I demand that they are at that debate on Friday the 20th. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll see what happens, but the pressure's coming on. As I've said to you before, that when the people, where we are now is that the people are scared of the politicians. The politicians in my country and around the world are inflicting things upon the people, and they don't like them. They're worried about us. But when you get elections coming up, and we've got elections in the next 12 months probably, when the politicians are scared of the people, that's when you get democracy, and when they need those votes and people are sending videos into them, a message saying, I want you at that debate, I think they'll have a better turnout.
There will be more debates about things that they don't like, for example, new treaty of WHO and the new international health regulations.
Yep, we had the WHO pandemic treaty debate in March, but that was only because 156 people signed a petition. In the UK Parliament we have a quirk that if 100,000 people sign an online petition for a debate, we have to have it. Doesn't say when we have to have it, but we do have to have it. We had the one on the treaty, the pandemic treaty or accord in March. We've just passed a few weeks ago the 100,000 for a debate on calling for a debate on the international changes to the international health regulations, WHO, which are equally sinister. And I'm waiting, I keep writing to the government, they haven't told me when the date is for that. Although, I'm trying to combat that a bit by on the 24th of October, so the next Tuesday after my speech on the Friday, I've got something called a 10-minute rule motion where I ask leave of the House, and I have 10 minutes to explain why I need to bring in legislation. Well, the legislation I'm looking to bring in, I'm going to explain to the House, will be the Sovereignty and Referendums Bill. A bill to prevent governments from giving away sovereignty to supranational, unelected, unaccountable bodies. I can't think of any, perhaps the WHO, for instance. That's what I'm going to make. So I'm going to make that speech and force them to either vote for my bill or vote me down.
And you suffer hard politically. Last month, they expel you from the Conservative Party, and now you're still active. Can you send a message for people who are in minority? There is a lot of them who want to talk about this unpleasant situation, what was happening last 3 years, and what is in front of us. How they can fight.
Well, at the end of the day, the truth is like a lion. We don't have to protect it. All we have to do is set it free. It can look after itself. And all I'm doing is setting the truth free. And they'll never beat it. They can beat me, but they can't beat the truth because it's always going to be there.
That's right.
Yeah. And they said to me privately, the party said to me they wanted to cover the vaccine harms up for 20 years. The reason they threw me out the party is I said that's unacceptable, especially when you came after the children. And you'll say, well, you threw your career away for nothing. I didn't. When I spoke out against them vaccinating small children in December, they never vaccinated small children in my country. And when I spoke out in March about the efficacy of the booster, they said it was all rubbish, but within 2 weeks they changed the rules and only over 75s were getting the boosters. So I have made a difference, and I'll make a difference when I speak again. And we're probably not going to have an election for a year in the UK, maybe next May. It's probably more likely to be this time next year. I've got a good chance of holding my seat even as an independent. And the longer it goes, the more people wake up and realise what's been done to them, the better my chances. So,
yeah. There is some things that are happening after this pandemic. It's digitalization and central bank digital currency.
Digital ID and central bank digital currency,
okay.
Yes. That's a digital prison. I mean, we've got them. The government are bringing in, government and the opposition are bringing in, low traffic neighbourhoods where people basically are penned into their areas with only one road out, which means in the event of a lockdown, you've only got one road to close off. Also,
can you explain to our viewers what's happening in London, ULEZ?
Oh, the ULEZ. Oh, yes. Well,
ultra low emission zone.
Ultra low emission zone. Despite the fact that the air in London is 99% is good. There's a little bit of moderate. There's no bad air above ground. The only pollution there is in London is on the underground train system, which is very, very bad. They're not doing anything about that. He's expanding this ULEZ. It's been seen for what it is, which is a massive tax. And people who can't afford a new car or an electric car, they're going to be having to pay £12 a day, so sort of €15 a day to drive to work. I mean, it's crazy. So it's really unpopular, it's undemocratic, and the public are fighting back. They are vandalising the cameras.
Yeah.
As fast as they can put them up. There's a lot of opposition. It isn't going to go away. And they're also bringing in lots of cities what they call low traffic neighbourhoods, which is putting bollards on lots of streets and restricting the access. So there's only basically one road out of an area, and that makes it so easy then to put a camera on that area, and when they say, oh, you're only allowed to travel 3 times a week or whatever unless you pay the fines, and this is all starting to come in as well. And they're bringing them in as trials, saying, well, we haven't got to do much consultation because it's only a trial for 18 months. I promised them, the people, I said to them, look, they're not putting all that infrastructure in and the cameras and thinking they're going to take them down in 18 months' time because they're going to want the money. But I mean, they're being vandalised as well.
They're 15-minute cities.
They're 15-minute cities with by another name that no one voted for, and it's a loss of freedom. So all of these things, and of course, I mean, something I've opposed vehemently is the sexualisation of our children in schools with inappropriate material at inappropriate ages, and the constant pushing of this gender ideology where anyone can be anything they want to be regardless of the facts of male or female. I'm taking the government to court on that for breach of the it's illegal in the UK under the 1992 Education Act to indoctrinate, because that's not science. Gender ideology is a theory. It's not science. It's not scientific at all.
And also children can decide to change the gender. Very small children.
And we've got children then, not just gender, they're saying they're cats.
The cats.
A cat.
Yeah.
And another one saying he's a mouse.
And also dog, as I see.
Yes, and
dogs.
Yes, because there's no end to it.
Yeah.
This is insanity. I mean, one of the very few, when you're a small child, one of the first things you know is that there are boys and there are girls. And if you start pulling away at those foundations of the way you see the world, everything's on very dodgy foundations. And being a child and growing up is complicated enough without all of this as well.
Yes, and one more thing.
Yes.
They're now pushing very hard that we're going to go bust if we do nothing about climate changes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just another. In the 70s, they told, as a child of that era, I mean, I can remember being told we were going into another ice age in the 70s, and then we had, I think it was acid rain, was going to kill all the fish and poison the land, and then we had the ozone scam that was going to burn us all up, and then of course Al Gore's told us for 30 years that we've only ever got 10 years left before the planet burns up. It is rubbish. I speak to a lot of very respected climate scientists, and basically unless they go along with that narrative, they won't get any funding. So I'm afraid the science has been bought again. And it's the same people who are profiting from all of this narrative who've been profiting from the misinformation around COVID-19 and the vaccines. So,
yes, same people, same agenda.
Same people, same agenda.
Thank you, Andrew. It was
You're very welcome.
to talk with you again.
Keep the faith.
You too.
All the best to the Balkans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have witnessed a large mass protests by people around the world in the past 3 pandemic years. Instead of great reset, a great awakening has happened. Mrs. Fiona Hayne played an important role in the protests in Great Britain. She shared her experience with us. Let's listen to her. Fiona Hayne, welcome to our show in Croatia. You have a huge experience in things like protest in Great Britain. That's something very important. What can you tell us about your experience the last 3 years?
Last 3.5 years, well, it started very early for me. So before they actually locked us down in the UK, they released what was called the Coronavirus Act and the legislation with which they were going to lock us down. And I think in reading that, there was an awful lot of areas of concern, including potential mandates, medical mandates for the vaccine. So myself and, so there were several other people at the time that I know were sort of interacting on Facebook who'd sort of questioned what was going on in China. But we mobilized very early. I think we started to connect with people on social media in March of 2020, so right at the beginning. And people I'd never been a protester, I'd never organized a protest before, but in going out and meeting a very small group of people, you realize you're not the only skeptic, you're not the only one questioning it. And we realized that we had to be out in the community and actually demonstrating in the streets what we were talking about online and trying to inform other people. So right at the beginning, I think my first protest, I went out sort of end of March, early April. And then when I went out again in May, there was 200 people rather than 20 people. Mm-hmm. And I just had my sign and I sort of stood there with stand against the tyrannical government. But it was really how the police behaved with us that made me really see that they were desperately trying to silence us. So out of 200 people, I think, in the park that day, there was probably about 500 police officers, and 19 of us were arrested. And it was like they picked on people who either had a megaphone that were talking or that had signs. So I was one of those people that were arrested. And I think the police at the time thought that would be some kind of deterrent to scare you, hold you in a jail cell for 12 hours or 24 hours and to stop you from doing it again. But actually, it just spurred me on to do it more. So it actually started very small. It started with handing out leaflets in the community. So we had several other little sort of gatherings. They got bigger and bigger. So then we started marching around the streets, so with banners and signs to spread our message. And then the first big rally that I was part of organising was in Trafalgar Square in August of 2020, which coincided with a rally in Germany. So we called it Unite for Freedom, because we were actually, on the same day as we knew that people out Heiko Schoening and Kennedy in Germany. And that day, we had no idea how many people would turn up, but we filled. There was at least 70,000 people sort of in Trafalgar Square, shoulder to shoulder, sort of tightly packed in. And I think that day we realized how many people wanted to hear the message. So from that moment on, I just went and organized again. But at the time, it was very much about giving a platform to the medical experts and the scientists and the skeptics and people who, in our opinion, had the credibility to speak on what was going wrong and what they were doing and so on. And it just sort of, I just carried on. I think there was some kind of moral compulsion in me saying, I must do something. I must stand up and be counted, because we can all share information on social media. We can all talk about, how awful it is. But for me, going out on the streets and demonstrating is showing that what you believe in non-compliance, going out and saying, no, I won't tolerate this.
And what do you think about success of this protests?
I mean, I think we've been hugely successful because we had, as I say, 15, 20 people in April of 2020, 70,000 in that summer, and it just grew and grew and grew. And I think perhaps at the time as well, when we sort of moved into 2021, because obviously the vaccine was rolled out in the UK in December, on the 7th of December of 2020, and we had warned about it and said that, they were untested, they weren't going to be safe and effective. We said all the things that might possibly happen, all of the harm and injury. And then obviously we started to see that happen. But we were in lockdown for almost 2 years. There was some form of restriction. We had it, very heavy at one point where you couldn't go outside your house for more than 1 hour a day. Then they sort of eased up, but then they cracked down again at the winter. And as we moved into 2021, we saw the numbers were so big that we couldn't really do anything that was static. And we couldn't really stand there and listen to people speaking anymore because we knew what was going on. So then the numbers were maybe 500,000 in March of 21. So we marched through, central London, and we spread our message through banners, leaflets and signs. And I think as well, people felt a little bit like they were being slightly anarchistic in breaking the rules. So, of course, many of us who organised, I think 5 in total in London, have been convicted of organising during the lockdown. So we're criminals for gathering in these groups.
You were also convicted.
Yeah, I was convicted. I've got several convictions for breaching the mandates or the Coronavirus Act, but you get convicted under the Public Health Act. So that's how they brought about this legislation, for gathering in a group of more than 2, 6 or 30. So I think they tried to make examples of a few people because, leading the people and getting the people to go on the streets, obviously they didn't want that. But the fact that we kept going, and I think it doesn't matter, we've seen change in numbers over the last 3.5 years. But for every 2 months over the last 3.5 years, I've done a big rally in London. So we've seen, I think that we had over 1 million people on the streets in spring of 21. Myself and another group would alternate between sort of organising, so we'd support each other. They do 1 month, I do another month, because it's exhausting organising. But it was the fact that we kept going. And even when the numbers dropped, when we came out of lockdown in 2022, the numbers dropped because people had this feeling that maybe it was over, or maybe people thought that they weren't sort of breaking rules. So, we didn't see that many people on the streets in 2022. But actually there was things like the vaccine mandates. So we had the NHS care workers and health, clinical staff and paramedics who 78,000 of them were unvaccinated completely. And we held a rally, and it was a worldwide rally for freedom. There was over 100 cities worldwide in January of 2022. And we were out for a very specific purpose. It was to stand against those mandates. And every time we've gone out over the last 3.5 years, there's always been either something new or something that we still need to achieve. So that purpose was to stand against those vaccine mandates. Sorry.
No problem. You were also organizing for people who were vaccine injured.
Yes. So given that I went to mass vaccination centres in 2021, I was going out in the community and leafleting and doing what we call community outreach, trying to tell people it would be safer to wait. I always tried to reach people in a sort of compassionate way without trying to do what the government was doing and scare people. And unfortunately, thousands and thousands and thousands of people were queuing up to get this unsafe and untested experimental vaccine, non-vaccine. And I knew that at some point, the people who had chosen to be vaccinated would know what was going on. Whether they sustained injury or a loved one sustained injury, or if they lost a loved one, there was always going to come a point where we would need to be united, because the government, Bill Gates, everything that they have done, the puppet masters of all of this, has been to divide and conquer through everything. So I knew there would be a point where we would need to be united to stand against these criminals together. So at the end of 2022, I decided then to run a campaign to give a voice to the vaccine injured and bereaved. And we called it COVID Vaccine Victim Awareness Month. The name of the campaign was Truth Be Told. And I've always maintained that we need to be a credible threat. So what's more credible than somebody who's been injured or lost a loved one, who has the medical proof, who's now either completely disabled and in a wheelchair.
And also receive compensation for it.
Exactly. So we have that, it's the evidence and the proof of what we never wanted to happen that people needed to see. Because they weren't being acknowledged by the government. They're making it very difficult to be acknowledged by the healthcare system because they're trying to put all the vaccine injury, basically, they're putting down as long COVID. So it's very hard for them to get acknowledgement, and there's a lot of frustration, clearly, because people's lives have been changed forever. Previously very fit and healthy people are now in wheelchairs and disabled. They can't go for even a walk. So their lives have changed. And having them on a platform and giving them a voice and standing with us and people that have not taken the vaccine, who tried to stop this harm, who never wanted it to happen. And standing together was really, really powerful. And hearing their stories and their testimonies was really, really powerful. And we also found that the public were paying attention. So it wasn't so much, conspiracy theory, anti-vax, anti-mask, anti-lockdown, conspiracy theorists, crazy people. How can you ignore somebody who's saying, I've been vaccinated, I've been injured, my government harmed me, they don't care about me?
And they confirmed that they harmed me.
Exactly. They've confirmed, and we have mountains and mountains of paperwork with some people who've spent maybe even 2 years and trying to get an inquest to prove that it was a vaccine that killed their loved one. For example, Alex Kelly, she's bereaved, and she runs a group in the UK as well for vaccine injured and bereaved, and she lost her mother 4 days after the AstraZeneca vaccine. We've got a lot of AstraZeneca injury in the UK. Of course, that was what was rolled out initially. And it's just heartbreaking that her mother was in the medical field. She did not want to be vaccinated. Every single person is a victim, both you and I, whether it's because we've had to suffer what we suffered and we've been made criminals, or we've been censored, or we've been hated, and the government have done what they've done to everybody. They've lied to all of us. And it was through fear-mongering, coercion, and wartime propaganda that people believed and trusted in, and they were doing it because they wanted to keep other people safe. So we're the ones that have to maintain our compassion and our empathy and our humanity, because they want us divided. So why should we play into that? So yeah, having the proof, it gave the movement credibility. And as we marched through London, in January, we did 6 locations in January. We traveled all over the UK spreading this message, giving a voice to many people across the UK who'd been vaccine injured or had lost a loved one. But in London, we had a big screen outside the BBC. And that was about being heard, because right next to Oxford Circus, Oxford Street, that sound travelled down the street. So one of the reasons we do these big screens and every now and then, and we have these speakers, is because every passerby, every tourist, every person that lives in London that's commuting for work or just walking around, they'll stop and they listen and they hear it. Even if they don't stand there with us, they see and hear what we do. So that's really impactful. And I've done marching and I've done rallies where we've had a big screen to spread a message, but I don't care about being reported in the mainstream media. I care about reaching the people and the community at large and the people on the street. So when we marched on that day in January with the vaccine injured and bereaved led our march. People in wheelchairs. One particular person has had his leg amputated from above the knee. We silently marched. It was complete silence. And everyone, the reception from the public, and they were looking, they were interested, they were taking photos, they were crying. So we were seen in a way that I don't think we've ever really been seen before. And that was hugely impactful. And we had people join us and come and shake people's hands and say, well done for doing what you're doing, or I lost someone, or I'm sure that I'm injured because I've not been well since my Pfizer, you know. So we reach a community. And that was really, really impactful. And then we send a message to the government with white roses, sewing them over to show how many people have been harmed. And getting these messages out on social media as well. This is why part of what I do is, yes, we need to reach the community. We need to be on the streets. We need to inform. They need to see us and see these people. But then on social media, I don't think we're as censored as we have been. We're not as ridiculed as we have been, because the proof of what we said is there.
Yeah.
So
more and more people knows.
Yeah.
What do you think? What you can expect in United Kingdom for the next period, and what you can send as a message to people from Croatia?
I think, okay, to be honest, I think lots of people have lots of predictions about what they're going to do. What we do know is it's going to get worse before it gets better. What we do know is that it does absolutely take personal loss, personal injury and a harm for somebody to realize what's going on. And the next thing, I think it's going to be money. I think people are going to be hit financially, and that will wake them up, that will make them realize they're being lied to. So it always takes personal loss for people to realize, I've been lied to, there's something going on, I need to start questioning it, and then I need to stand up. So I don't know specifically. I never like to make predictions because anything could happen. It could be a new virus, it could be the climate change. Yeah. Guise of sort of, you know, saving the planet, you must lock us down again. But the fact that they're handing over power, every country is losing their sovereignty, and power is being handed to unelected bureaucrats. World Economic Forum, who are very, you know, sort of spearheading this, and you know, they're infiltrating our governments globally, and then the World Health Organization. So they're trying to take away our power. We've known that from the beginning, and I do think it's going to get worse, and we'll see more loss. The advice that I give to people is, even when the numbers have dropped and we've gone down to maybe 5,000 people rather than 50,000 people, I personally I keep going, because I know it's going to build, and I know that we need to keep demonstrating mass non-compliance on the streets, as well as sharing the information at conferences and on social media. So keep going. There's a lot of people who have this subjective opinion that protest is meant to suddenly solve a problem. You think that your government is going to come out and hand you the keys and say, okay, you can run the country now. That's not why we protest. We protest to demonstrate unity, because it's being united that we win. So my advice to anybody that does organize or wants to organize is, one, don't buy into the divide and conquer, and maintain your compassion, your humanity, your empathy for the masses, because everybody is a victim of something. Also, don't buy into the infighting, because through history, any movement that's failed, it's failed because of infighting. It's failed because of controlled opposition, spreading whispers that get picked up by people, and then people who are purportedly on our side then start whispering about each other and make these accusations unfounded completely. I'm sure you've probably had that experience with people saying things that are untrue about you because you're effective. So when you're effective, you're attacked by controlled opposition. Don't buy into that with anybody that's on our side that might be criticizing you for doing what you're doing. Ignore it and continue with a pure heart, knowing that you're doing the right thing. So the biggest problem, I think, at the moment, actually, that we have is this infighting, is this she's controlled opposition, he's controlled opposition, don't follow them. And I ignore it. I try to just encourage unity constantly. And I'm never, ever discouraged by the numbers, because our numbers go up and down and up and down. And all I've seen is this mass awakening. Now, vaccinated people on our side, people are seeing the information that we're putting out there. And we can't give up, because revolution is a process and not one event. So we need to keep going on the streets and demonstrating the mass non-compliance and raising that mass awareness, because there's millions of more sleeping lions, as I like to say.
Yeah. Fiona, you are a really brave woman, and thank you for that. And continue with your work. We have to wake up a lot more lions.
Yes, we do. Yes.
It was really a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nitko vas neće natjerati da se poklonite zvijeri, učinit ćete to svojevoljno, odbacujući vjeru. Bićete laka meta za zvijeri, jer se niste podredili vjeri. Ako se ne podredite vjeri, podredit ćete se zvijeri. Toliko ćete se suobličiti sa ovim svijetom, da nećete ni prepoznati da ste u zabludi. Biće to najveća demonska prevara ikada i pravedno zaslužena osuda nad nepokajanim grešnicima.
Gdje su svi oni koji